a lot of y'all don't know me, and some of our campuses and those online, you haven't really seen me up here besides the screen too much. So I just wanted to take a minute to introduce myself. You're going to hear a little bit about my story today. And before we get too deep into that, I wanted to introduce you to my family. They should have a picture up here on the screen. There they are. My wife, my 3 kids, Jaden, Bria, and Aria. I am so grateful for that little clan. They keep me so grounded. They support me in every step of the way. They're a huge part of every piece of my story, and they're the reason I keep fighting for my story. And I'm just so grateful for them. Last week, we had a special guest here. His name was Brian Cedarwall from the Denver Dream Center. And how many of y'all liked Brian's message last week? It was such an amazing message filled with hope and transformation, and I was super grateful to sit here and listen how they're changing the trajectory, not only of a few people's lives, but they're changing an entire city. And that just rings so true for me. I just wanted to run out of here afterwards and go find somebody to help, and I was super excited. But he was reading through Acts 27 and 28 in those chapters, and that's where we're going to read from a little bit today. And if you want to go ahead and turn there, you can. But these messages or these passages, they really resonated with my testimony and how God stepped in to use his pain in my life, or to use my pain in my life for his glory. And real quick, how many of y'all have been turned around, lost, took the wrong way? Maybe you tried to go somewhere, but there was a roadblock and had to go another way? Well, there's one time in my life where I went and I had to pick up my in-laws from whatever the big airport is in New York City. But either way, it was New York City. How many of y'all like driving in New York City? I don't. I can't stand it. It's really difficult. New Yorkers, I don't know how you do it. But we had to go down there. So that was the easy part. We made it down. We picked them up. And then we had to leave the city. And leaving the city is just as difficult as getting into the city. And at the time, we had a GPS, and it wasn't on your phone. It was before they had GPSs on your phone. And we had this really old one, and it was probably like the first generation of GPS ever. It was about that thick and like that big, and it couldn't stay on without being on the charger. And it hadn't been updated in 10 years probably prior to us using it. So we're trying to leave the city, and it doesn't know how to figure out all the different routes, because how many, trying to leave the city, there's one exit, and then another exit, then another exit, and then there's roads underneath, so the GPS is confused on where you are. So we were trying to leave, and we hit the first toll after the first exit, and the GPS said, take a right. So we're like, okay, we'll take a right. We took the first one, and it turns out we got back into the city. And then we went back around. Okay, this isn't the right way, clearly. Now we got to U-turn and get back out of the city. So we hit another toll, and then we do it again. We hit another right turn, and it takes us back into the city. And we just did this loop, probably $50 worth of tolls. And we were scrounging for change out of the jars and lifting up the little rugs in the car, trying to figure out how we're going to pay for the toll. We ended up getting just enough for the last toll, and we made it out of the city. And we finally made it home. Thank God, I needed a nap. It was annoying, to be honest with you. But much like this story, my journey into ministry wasn't exactly an easy one. There was lots of things that would knock me off track, and honestly, I didn't think I would get back on track. But it all started when I was pretty young. And by young, I mean 8 days old. I was born, and then 8 days later, my parents were like, hey, guess what? We're going to church. And from that point on, at 8 days old, I stepped foot in the church. Or I guess I didn't step foot. My parents probably carried me in. But we walked into the church. I was 8 days old. I see my family was heavily involved in church, and they're still very heavily involved in church. But every Sunday, we were there. I was there from the very beginning to the very end. We did Sunday school, and then we did children's church, and then we did whatever potluck was after, and then we did the outreach, and my parents served in all these different places. And then on Wednesdays, we would come because my mom, she ran the missionettes, and my dad was part of the Royal Rangers, and I was a Royal Ranger, so we did all of that every Wednesday. And then as I became a teenager, we were at youth group, and my whole life was just surrounded by church growing up. And see, when you're in the church from that young age, you start to hear and pick up phrases, right? So for me, one of the things that I always picked up was this idea of a calling or a purpose. And as a teenager, I always wanted to know what that was because my friends are going to the altar and they're coming back and they're so excited, like, I'm going to be a pastor, I'm going to be a missionary, I'm going to do this awesome thing. And I always came back with nothing. But I wanted to know, so I started to pursue it. Every time there was an altar call, I would run to the altar seeking God. What am I going to do with my life? Who am I supposed to be? All my friends have a calling. What's my calling? I had no idea. I kept praying, I kept asking. I went and bothered leaders about it in our church. I went and bothered pastors, probably to the point where they were like, dude, you're gonna get it, settle down. They were probably real annoyed at me. I was an obnoxious teenager. So every year as a teenager, though, we went to youth convention. And same thing, every altar call. And if you haven't been to a youth convention, the third night, they always do an altar call around calling. Come to the altar if you feel led to be a pastor, if you feel led to be a missionary. And I never went to that altar call, but I went to the other ones all weekend because every time I left with nothing. But see, this little desire to know became an obsession. I wanted to know who I was so I could show everybody around me in my church that I had a calling too. I wasn't going to be the only one in my church without a calling. I wasn't going to be the only one in my youth group without a calling or a purpose. But because I couldn't hear it for myself and I couldn't see it for myself, the little fingers of it, depression and anxiety started to seep into my mind. See, I was always told by leaders when I would be prayed over or I'd go to the altar, I'd have random people who would pray for me. They'd be like, you're going to be a kingdom champion. You're going to be a world changer. But I never believed them because I couldn't see it for myself. So I began to question deeper if I even had a calling. God, do I have this? Everybody else seems to, but I don't, and I can't hear it, and I don't know what to do. But all the while, I continued to check the boxes. I prayed every day. I prayed before I ate. I prayed before bed. I prayed when I woke up. I read my Bible. I served as best as I knew how to as a teenager. Back then, it wasn't this, like we have some of our teens operating cameras, which is awesome. Our production team is awesome, and it's full of teenagers. I didn't have that opportunity as a teen because, well, we didn't have giant cameras. We had transparencies, the clear transparencies, and you had to put it on this light thing. Anyways. So it all went from little stuff like that, and I didn't think I had much purpose in that. But as an adult, I continued to question my calling all the while I was serving. At our church, I became the youngest person to sit on our board. I ran our youth group, which was starting to push numbers that were close to the churches. And I was helping with Royal Rangers and Sunday school and VBS. I was always the guy getting pied in the face at VBS. I helped with Royal Rangers, and every outreach that we did, I was involved, but all the while, the lie that was in my mind started to form into a belief that I had no God-given purpose, that I was never going to make any kind of an impact in the world. Well, let me tell you, I was blinded, right? I was blinded by the lies of Satan, and I was already making a kingdom impact in those areas, but I could never see it for myself. So fast forward a little bit, we're going to youth convention, and I'm taking this awesome crew with me. I think we had like 35 kids and 10 leaders with us, and it was really exciting. And all the while, I'm depressed. We have 35 kids going to meet with Jesus this weekend, and I can't see past myself. So I go to youth convention not expecting to get anything for myself, because as a lead, you don't want anything for yourself in that environment. You want to see your teenagers engage with Jesus. You want to see their lives impacted. You want to see them grow, and you want to see them saved. So I didn't go expecting anything for myself, as this was the norm. We just did it for these kids, and that's all we wanted. So I brought my middle daughter with me. She's much bigger than she was in this story, but she was a little tiny baby. We couldn't leave her home with anybody, so we brought her to youth convention with us. And youth convention can be pretty loud. There's upwards of 6,000 teenagers that come from all around the state to meet with Jesus in Syracuse. Needless to say, she was overwhelmed by the loud teenagers, the loud music, the preacher, the lights. Everything was a little chaotic for this poor little babe. So I took her, hey, Alicia, my wife, you stay here with the teens, other leaders, support them. I need to take the baby and go walk. So I went up to the top edge of the OCC arena, and there's concession stands and all sorts of stuff, but the most important thing is it was quiet. Even with the singing, even with the preaching, it was quiet there. And somehow I found my way towards the back of the stage because, boy, is it real quiet. No speakers are pointing that way, so it was awesome. And I sat along the wall with my little baby in hand, and I was listening to the preacher, all the while praying, God, what is my purpose? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I supposed to be with these teenagers, trying to help them see you? What am I supposed to do? Because I still don't know. And as the pastor continued to preach, and this guy was awesome. I don't remember his name, but I remember him speaking very clearly about youth ministry and about being a youth pastor and about calling on your life. And in that moment, I felt like a hand slid up in my chest and was tugging away at my heart. Every time he said youth pastor, the pull was there. Every time he said youth leader, the pull was there. He said youth, the pull was there. Teenager, and it didn't stop the entire time until we finally came down. I came down from that area in tears because God had just confirmed into me that I still had a calling in my life. I finally knew what I was supposed to do. I went and told my mom, and my mom she was my youth leader, and my parents, they were huge in my spiritual formation. I'm really grateful for them. And my mom was like, I knew it. I saw it in you this whole time, the way you act with the teens, how you relate to them. I could see it in you from the time you were a teenager. And I was so excited because that was even more confirmation. And it was finally a relief. But you see, I thought things would get better with my mental health when I found out what my calling was. It didn't. As a matter of fact, things seemed to get worse. As I stepped into my calling and I stepped heavily into pursuing youth ministry, all of the leaders around me started to fall away from their faith. There was kids that stopped coming into our youth group, and as a youth leader, that's not what you want. The whole goal is to get kids in so that they can encounter Jesus, and because they were leaving, I thought, this is on me. This is my weight to carry. This is my burden. And with that, trust from leadership started to slip. Their confidence in me as a leader started to go away. I may have found my purpose, but all the while I was still depressed. It was finally time, though, that I spoke up. I decided, I can't pour into people when I'm empty. You can't do it. So I went to our board and our lead team, and I was like, guys, this is what I'm dealing with. This is how I'm feeling. I don't know what to do. I think I need to step down. And they said, you're right, let's step down. Someone else will fill the role. It's fine. But what we'll do is we'll do a 12-week mentorship program with you, and we'll walk through this together, and we'll figure out why you're dealing with this depression and this anxiety and figure out what's going on with your mind. And it just didn't work that way. See, we were supposed to meet for 12 weeks. We met twice, and then we never talked about it again. All the while, when that was put into place, if I didn't finish the mentorship, I wasn't allowed to serve anymore. So from that point forward, 20 years in this church, I was no longer allowed to serve. So needless to say, I felt abandoned. All the depression and the anxiety, everything with my mental health just started to spiral out of control. All of the questions that I had been asking about whether or not this was my true calling or not was finally answered. I wasn't meant to be a youth pastor. At least that's what I thought. I thought I was stepping away to deal with all this mental health stuff, but in my mind I was told I wasn't good enough to be a youth pastor anymore. I wasn't good enough to serve in my church of 20 years anymore. There wasn't a day that went by where I didn't think There wasn't a day that went by where I didn't think this world would be better off without me. I would just sit in my room and I would listen to the battle inside of my mind. Depression would say, end this life, you're worthless and you have no purpose. Anxiety on the other side would say, but what about your family? What about your friends? What about the people that rely on you? So I sat back and let them control my life. The war for my mind, it never stopped. Day in and day out. But what I didn't realize was that in this time, God was lovingly and relentlessly pursuing me by placing strategic people at the right place and at the right time. Some of those people were my parents. See, they were part of the launch team for Two Rivers Cortland, and they were super excited about it, and we lived with them at the time, which was already chaotic. 3 kids living at your parents' house, trying to save money for your own is chaos. But all the while, they were inviting me to come check out this church. And I'm like, no, I don't want to be at your church. I don't want to go to church at all. I don't want to be involved in ministry in any way, shape, or form because I'm not good enough for that. I have no purpose in church. There's no reason for me to be there. I'm not going to your church. Leave me alone. Mom and Dad, I know you're watching. I'm sorry. And thank you for relentlessly pursuing me. See, they slowed down. They stopped asking. But that made way for other people to ask and invite. And some of those people were Chris and Kendra. I don't know if you know them. They sing on the worship team, and they're amazing. But at the time, they were the campus pastors in Cortland, and they had done launch team meetings and other meetings, like team meetings at my parents' house, and we lived there, and I was weirded out by pastors then. I was like, hey, nice to meet you. But they loved on me. They were kind about it. They knew I wasn't in a place to join church yet, but still they lovingly asked, knowing that I'm probably not going to say yes, but they did. Another good example of this was a good friend of mine. His name's Brenton. He would jokingly, but listen, the most earnestly harass me to come to church. He literally told me, dude, I'm getting annoyed with God telling me to harass you to come to church. Can you just come and try it just to get God off my back? So in 2019, reluctantly, I was like, all right, fine, I'm going to go to church. Church was good for me, as a kid at least. Maybe not as much as an adult, but as a kid, church was good for me. It gave me a good moral framework. It gave me a good spiritual framework and a good outlook. Let's take my kids to church. So we live literally a block away from the Cortland campus. We had no excuse not to show up. Our car could have blown up and we could have walked and still been there early. All that to say, we decided to go. It was 2019, we went, but I was like, nope, I'm not going to serve. I'm not going to talk to anybody. We're going to go. I'm going to sit in the back, and when we're done, we're going to leave. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in church. I don't want to be around these people. Because in my mind, I was still super messed up. I was still super broken, and I had no purpose in being there. I went expecting these old crusty Christians, they're holier than thou, because that was my previous experience, and I thought they were just going to judge me based on my tattoos alone, let alone get to know me. But instead, I received the complete opposite. I had people smiling at us, they were waving at us, they were high-fiving us, and believe it or not, shout out to the Cortland host team because they actually complimented my tattoos. So this is significant and a whole nother story. I'll tell you about that at a different time. But that was significant for me. They welcomed me for who I was. And I left in complete awe of that church. Everyone that walked through the door, people that at my old church we would have turned away, was welcomed. Pastor Will that week during his sermon had mentioned, and we see it all the time and we say it all the time here, but I wholeheartedly believe this, that we are the perfect church for people who aren't. And that you can come to this church no matter what you look like, no matter what you act like, no matter what you vote like or smell like, you are welcome here. And I believe that because I've experienced it firsthand. It completely changed the perspective I had on church. So we started to attend regularly, and I started serving on whatever team would take me. I started to see people like Jesus did. I started to see myself like Jesus did, and God began to work on my heart again. A few years later, life just started lifing again because it never stops. The storms, they never end just because we're in a lull or it's moved on for now. They never end. See, at the time, my pastor that I had gotten close to again moved on to a new church. And it was so hard for me not to feel abandoned. It wasn't his fault. He needed to go where God needed him to go. But in my heart, I was like, oh, I'm going to be abandoned again. Now I got to find a new pastor, and I got to do this thing. Luckily, we had an awesome one come, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But I shouldn't have been putting my faith in people. I should have been putting my faith in Jesus. That's why I felt so abandoned. Then another part of the big storm that hit my life was somebody that I loved and I trusted came out and told me they had mistreated me and my siblings as a child. And it must have been some heinous form of mistreatment because I don't remember it. I blacked it out completely. And to this day, I still can only see glimpses of it, and that's because I'm praying that God will reveal it to me so that I can process through it still. There's still pain. And at the time, it was devastating. It changed the entire dynamic of my family. It took a tightly weaved, close external family. Everybody came around on Christmas. Everybody came around on Thanksgiving, and it all fell apart. To this day, I still barely speak to some of the people in my family, and it breaks every part of me. I love my family. See, money was tight, and after all that, money was the least of my worries, but our cars were falling apart, and it felt like everything in that moment was falling apart around me again. How many of you know when things start to get going good, Satan likes to jump in and try and shut it all down, huh? I know I'm not the only one that feels that. But this time, things were different. My relationship with Jesus was stronger than it had ever been. I stuck it out even though everything in me was screaming to leave and jump back into the pit that was the depths of my mind. But I'm so glad I didn't. Because what I didn't realize then was that God was in the midst of all of these blows, forging me to be the man that I needed to be in order to step into my calling. Not long later, we welcomed Pastor Jared at the Cortland campus as our new pastor. And as a team lead at the time, I had to work closely with him, but I wasn't going to get too close because I didn't want to feel abandoned again. God knew, though, that I needed somebody like Jared who would challenge me. And if you've ever met Pastor Jared, you'll know he's a challenger. And I promise you, if you let him challenge you, it will change your life. But he challenged me in probably the most basic way ever. It was my physical health. He's like, hey, let's go to the gym. Like, I haven't been to the gym in a long time. I'm getting a little bit thicker in places I don't want to be. So let's go to sure, fine, I'll go to the gym with you. So we started going to the gym, and it was every morning. And to this day, we're still at the gym 4 to 5 days a week, around 6-ish, if I can actually wake up. So our friendship in that, though, grew, and that gym time became small group time. Shout out to Pastor Jordan. Small groups are important, right? Small groups aren't just getting together, playing games, and having fun, right? It's a place we go to dig deeper together and to grow together and to pursue Jesus together. So that gym time became small group time, and we slowly started adding more guys to the group, and we would work out, and Pastor Jared would just pour into us. We became closer and closer, and as God worked on our hearts individually, we saw that relationship tighten, and I finally, for the first time ever, felt like I had a true pastor in my life. But we would learn from each other, and to this day, we're dreaming together. We're dreaming together about this church and the impact that it'll make. We're dreaming together about the Hope Foundation and the impact that that's going to make, and we're constantly challenging each other. See, I'm a creative, so I challenge him creatively, and he challenges me spiritually, and I need it. I need somebody who's going to push me. And I'll be honest, I don't know if I'd be standing here today if he hadn't been there for me. So Pastor Jared likes to read books. He definitely lives by the philosophy that leaders are learners, and he's reading books, he's listening to podcasts, and he's listening to sermons, and he goes to conferences. He is learning all the time. It's actually extremely impressive because not only is he a campus pastor, he runs a business and he helps with the Hope Foundation. All the while, he's still finding time to pursue Jesus and learn how to lead better. But he had just finished this book called Your Purpose is Calling by Darius Daniels, and he encouraged me to read it. See, Jared knew the potential that was in me. He could see it from the day he walked in, at least that's what he's told me. But he knew that I needed to be encouraged to pursue my calling again. So he told me to read this book, and boy, I am really glad I did, because it changed my life. In the book, there's so much practical and spiritual advice on calling and purpose that I had never learned in a church in the 30 years that I had been involved in it. I finished the book with a renewed confidence that I still had a calling on my life. I began to dig in and earnestly chase after what God wanted me to do. You see, this time, though, it wasn't an obsession. Because last time it was an obsession because I needed to show people that I was going to be a world changer. I needed to show my church that I was going to do something. I needed to show people that I was important. But this time, it wasn't that way. This time, I searched and searched and searched because I knew that God wanted me to be a world changer. Yeah. So, fast forward a little bit. I finished the book, and I'm driving to work, and at the time I was working for a company doing IT work, and I was praying, God, what was my purpose? Is it vocational? Am I supposed to be an IT guy? Am I supposed to just touch the community at my work? Am I supposed to just continue serving locally? What am I supposed to do? Because all I want to do now is be where you want me to be. So I make it through work, and it's just another day, another work. I get home, we eat dinner, we're hanging out, and I get a call from Pastor Vincenzo. If you all don't know Pastor Vincenzo, he was the youth pastor here before me. Shout out to Pastor Vincenzo. He's an amazing guy, and I'm so grateful that he was a part of our church and that he's doing amazing things in Rochester. But he gave me a call, and it wasn't uncommon. He was my lead. I was a volunteer youth lead, and he was the head youth pastor. So we had calls pretty regularly, but he called me, and he goes, hey, Jesse, before we get started, I have Pastor Will on the line. And I'm like, oh, no. The big dog is on the phone, too? Like, this guy leads the whole church. Why is he on the phone call, too? Like, did I do something wrong? What did I do? Like, did I break something? Did something blow up and you guys need my help? Like, what did Emily, did something happen? I don't know. Who knows? What happened? What's going on? I was nervous. I was a little anxious. And he's like, no. This is what's happening. I'm stepping down. I feel like God is calling me back to Rochester. I found a position at another church, and I'm leaving Two Rivers. I was like, dude, this stinks. Like, we're just getting to be friends and, like, really build our relationship, and now you're leaving too. And needless to say, I was a little bummed out. But at the end of the call, he goes, Jesse, listen, the reason we're calling you isn't just to warn you that somebody else is coming. The reason we're calling is because we want you to step into this position. We want you to be the staff youth pastor. We want you to lead the other youth pastors. We want you in this position, and we don't want anybody else. We don't want to have to go through the process of hiring somebody outside of the church when you already fit every single detail that we need for this position. Needless to say, I got off that call and I was a little in shock. I was in awe. I was inspired. I felt joy and peace and excitement. I sat on my bed and I cried. All of that knowing that God was in the midst of everything and that I hadn't lost my calling. God had confirmed to me in that moment that I was still called, and not only just to something random, but to youth ministry where it all started. I was completely knocked off track by the storms of life, but God knew I wasn't ready to step into ministry yet, and he was preparing me. Just like he prepared David in the fields fighting bears and lions to go and fight Goliath. He knew I needed to grow more before I stepped into my calling, and now because I went through the betrayal, the abandonment, anxiety, depression, and I had identity issues, I now have a testimony that can be used to speak into the lives of the teens that I get to be with and teach every week. My relationship with Jesus is the strongest it's ever been because of the miracles that it took to get me back on the path to pursuing my calling. And listen, I know I'm not alone in feeling this way. We've all been through or we're going through storms in our lives. Maybe it's like me falling into the mind trap the enemy sets for us. Your life feels out of control. You're just being driven by circumstances or events or whatever it is in your life. And you're just helpless. And sometimes feeling at least a little bit hopeless. Your life feels out of control. But let me tell you, there's more ahead. God has his hand in every part of your story. Now listen, I know some of you are sitting here and you're like, okay, I can't see that for me. But listen, I'm not the only person that's experienced this, okay? God shows us in his word in Acts chapters 27 to 28. I'm not going to read the whole thing because I'm already over. I'm going to paraphrase a bunch, so if I mess it up, my bad. But this is just another example of how a storm can knock us off track. So in Acts 27, we see Paul on a boat. He's setting sail from Rome to go appeal his case before Caesar. He had been running around talking about Jesus, and people really didn't like that. They were trying to kill him, and they were trying to take him to court to give him the death penalty. So he's leaving. He's on his way. He's like, I'm a Roman. I need to go to Rome and plead this case before Caesar himself. But on the way to Rome, they start to come across a big storm. And an angel comes to Paul, and he's like, hey, listen, you guys are going to survive, but none of your stuff is going to. Your boat's going to be destroyed. Everything you have, gone. So the storm ends, and it ends up pushing them all the way to Malta. And if you look at the map, it's totally off track from Rome. And it completely destroyed the ship. And then in chapter 28, we see them on the island of Malta. They all survived, just like the angel had said. They were shipwrecked, and I can imagine they were probably cold and wet, so Paul decided to start a fire. And I love this because Paul is this amazing man of God who saw people healed everywhere he went. He saw demons expelled everywhere he went, and he was preaching God's word and activating Christians, and he was building the church at this time. And instead of saying, hey, prisoners, come start a fire, or the two Christians that were with him, instead of saying, hey, you guys come start the fire, Paul, this amazing man of God, he went and started the fire for everyone. So when the fire got to warming up, a snake came out and it bit Paul. How many of y'all know, hey, I just got shipwrecked, and now I got bit by a snake. This is so easy to just walk away from God. Why am I on Malta? Why am I here? It would be so easy to get caught in that trap. And see, the people of Malta were kind of hanging around, and they saw him get bit, and they're like, oh boy, this prisoner, he's going to die. The snake bit him. That's it. It's done. But he didn't die. And they all saw it, and they all thought that he was a god. They were like, look at this god. He didn't die. This snake kills people all the time, probably. And he didn't die. So the chief man, his name was Publius, he came over after he saw he didn't die, and he was like, hey, you need to be in my company. So he hosted them for a couple of days, and Publius' father was sick. He had a fever and dysentery, and he asked Paul, he was like, hey, can you do something? And Paul said yes. So Paul went and healed this man. Afterwards, all of the sick people on the entire island, they came to Paul and they were healed. Later on, it says that he set sail from Malta and he made it to Rome. There's so many amazing things that I want you to see in these verses, but there's a lot, and I don't got time. Go through it, read through it. There's so many amazing things that happen on his trip to Rome. But there's a few things that I need you to hear. The first one is there will always be storms. You see, thanks to the fall of man in Genesis, there's always going to be storms, but God has given us the ability to weather these storms, especially when he's at the helm of it all. There's a good chance, though, that some of the things that are with you, they're not going to survive the storm. But God is showing us in these chapters that he's in it with us. He's protecting us. He's guiding us, and he wants us to make it to our destination with him in heaven. He wants us to persevere and not to give up. And listen, there will always be small miracles along the way. Paul watched people throughout his ministry get healed at the touch of one of his handkerchiefs. Demons were expelled as he walked through cities. This dude saw dead people come back to life. You imagine going to a funeral and this guy gets up and walks away. That's amazing. But surely not dying by getting bit by a snake was nothing but a small miracle in Paul's life. We need to change our perspective and see and be grateful for the small miracles that are happening every day in our lives. The people that are always rooting for you, the people that are inviting you back into a relationship with Jesus. There's things that are happening that we don't see. And as we're not seeing them, God's protecting us. That's why we're not seeing them. God's protecting us from things that we don't see. Be grateful for the things that we don't experience because God held it back for us. And listen, there's always going to be snakes. Satan will always throw things at you to knock you off the course that God has designed for you to take. So guard your heart. Stay in your word. Continue to pray and trust that God will get you through whatever the devil and whatever life decides to throw at you. Remember, you're exactly where God needs you to be. In the midst of all of this chaos of this trip to Rome, God used Paul to heal an entire community. He healed the elder, and then all of the sick followed. God took that moment of being shipwrecked and snake bitten to influence an entire island. You may be hurting or lost, but look for opportunities to serve because God's giving us those opportunities every day. You have the chance to make an impact every day. Be a part of changing the community around you. We all need Jesus, not just here in this building, but all the people in the streets. Everyone needs Jesus. Let God use this moment of pain and sorrow for good. He's setting you up for the impact that only you can make. And listen, you're not at the end of your path yet. Maybe you're where I was, thinking that you have no calling. Maybe you're a bit older and you feel like you've missed your calling, or you've missed out on all of the potential, or you've wasted it with the life that you've lived. I'm telling you today, you haven't. Keep going. Keep pursuing Jesus. If you need help discovering your purpose, guess what? We got Next Steps. Next Steps is a place that you can go and find out who you are. And I'm so grateful that we have an opportunity as a church to help and guide you, because I needed that and I never had it. Listen, you could join a small group. Get into community with people. Everybody's on a different path, but doesn't mean some of our roads don't cross. People can sow into you. They may be a few steps ahead, but find a place where you can be sowed into. Dig deep in your prayer life. And I mean deep. Be vulnerable and real with God. Don't fake it. He knows you're faking it. Hey, God, everything's all good. And inside you don't want to be here. God knows that. Be honest with him. Listen, fight for your purpose. Fight for your healing. Fight for your calling. Fight for those who can't fight. When the enemy comes trying to steal, kill, and destroy, shake him off, knowing that God's got plans for the pain in your life. God's got purpose for your pain, and he's not done with you yet. He's going to put you on the path that he needs you on, so you can make the kingdom impact that only you can make. Oh, man. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for all that you've done in my life, God, and all that you're doing in the lives around us, God. Thank you for being in the middle of the storms and using us in the midst of all the chaos to make an impact where we are. God, I pray right now that minds and perspectives would be changed to focus on you and where you are and not on us. And I pray that we would all be able to discover our purpose so that we can chase after you and discover who you truly are, God. God, thank you so much for being in the midst of it all. In your mighty name we pray. Amen.